I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on the Spotlight Network, we're stepping into a story of survival, war, and the fierce resilience of one unforgettable woman. The name of the book, Poplar Hill. It's written by a terrific author. His name is Stephen Ramey Glines, and he brings to life the haunting journey of Kitty Stevenson, an eccentric New Yorker turned recluse in rural Canada, battling a heart attack during a brutal ice storm while confronting the ghosts of her past. From Nazi Germany to the Canadian wilderness, this gripping novel is a powerful tale of self-reliance, moral reckoning, and a story that refuses to stay buried. We're
Wow, I'm gonna
delighted.
have to read that novel.
Absolutely. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. We ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel, by purchasing this amazing book. The links are below this interview. And be sure to download the Spotlight Network TV app streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Amazon Fire TV. Steve, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
It's a pleasure.
This is a novel, but it's based on real life situations, people, and so forth. Tell us a little bit about how this novel came about.
Well, my parents were perpetual storytellers. My father spent many years in China in the 1920s and 30s, and he would go on and on about, well, the last time I met Mao Zedong, and my mom would say, well, when I met Hitler. And they go back and forth like this for hours, and it was just fascinating to grow up with that stuff.
Yeah.
So when it got to the time of my grandfather always the writing is a perpetual habit in my family. My grandfather once said, he very pontificating, says, if all else fails, you can always write a book. So, you know, I've always written books.
That's a
And
good thing.
so it was just, taking their stories. It was just so much fun to do and turn it into a novel because it was too much work to actually make it nonfiction.
Kitty is a real person. You
Yep.
were friends with her. She had an incredible story to tell. Tell us a little bit about that story that Kitty shared when she was confronted on this blast of winter and she fell ill.
Well, she called me up and said, we're having an ice storm. I said, well, that's nice. And I was thinking, something else is going on here. And she says, and I'm having a heart attack. Why don't you call the 911? She said, well, those boys will probably kill themselves trying to get to me. I said, Mom, that's their job.
Yeah.
But she got stuck for about 3 days, and they made an amazing effort as one of the chapters to go get her. And the heart attack ultimately killed her, but it took about a year and a half. But she went from hospital to hospital, and meanwhile, her neighbor, who's also a real person, Barb,
Mhm.
just they were just buddies. Now Barb was just a local, didn't had never been to Europe, didn't really know what was going on, and Kitty just liked talking to them, and you'd go and I'd visit them, and they'd be yapping, not a mile a minute.
Yeah.
So I decided, okay, if I'm going to write a novel, I got to have it as a dialogue between these two, and that's basically what I did. So it takes place in the middle of nowhere, Canada, Poplar Hill, Nova Scotia, actually,
Yeah.
and I had fun with it because I think I captured the two characters pretty well, I think. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. The settings are very diverse. Nova Scotia, Nazi Germany, New York society. Give us a
yeah.
little bit of the story itself.
Okay. She was born to fabulous wealth. Her father literally grew up next to Teddy Roosevelt. He was an ultra right wing conservative, and he knew Eleanor Roosevelt as a playmate when he was a kid.
Mhm.
They were fabulously wealthy. She when she was 6 years old, she was deposited in a French boarding school and didn't see her parents again until she was 12.
Mhm.
But she had to write letters in French to her parents every week. And she, she got a telegram and said, no more money. Stop. Send Kitty home. Stop. So
Amazing.
at 12 years old, she managed to get her way back first class because my grandfather didn't want anyone to know that didn't have any money. And she arrived on Thanksgiving morning, 1933, to discover that they were still in their mansion, but had There were no servants, no nothing, and it was cold because he couldn't afford coal. So then she graduated from the local public high school, and the story in Germany began when during during the hyperinflation of the 1920s, my grandfather invested apparently a modest amount of money in Germany.
Mm.
And when Hitler came to power, he blocked the mark so you couldn't take any money out. And by then, he was rearming, and the German industry was booming. So she went there to spend it,
Mm.
literally. And she was not alone. There were many other rich Americans who in the same position. She wanted to study opera, so she went to Munich, and she went to a cafe, the Cafe Heck, where Hitler hung out.
Mm.
So she saw him all the time, and it just became, if you're a wealthy American, you could hang out and not feel particularly threatened.
Mm.
But she was there through Kristallnacht, and really, she was also she and her friends were all set up as reporters. So she wrote for the Chicago Tribune. Some others wrote for Reuters and AP and UPI and stuff like that. So I mean, she just as a 20-year-old kid with a typewriter,
Mm.
yeah, exploring Germany at the worst possible moment.
Amazing. Amazing. The
Yeah,
book touches on a personal moral failure. Can you
yeah.
explain without spoiling too much about that aspect of the story?
Well, what happened, and this part is actually fiction. I didn't it actually this first part is real. On Kristallnacht, one of her friends was a Jewish college professor who had basically been thrown out, and
Mm.
he was living in a closed bookstore that they had bought from his brother, who was also Jewish and trying to get to Israel. And on Kristallnacht, he was beaten up, hauled off to Dachau, and killed.
Mm.
And his daughter and mother pounded on Kitty's door, and she let him in and kept him safe for about a week. And things sort of calmed down. She sent them back. And one of the things that happened was the guy had a pistol,
Mhm.
and his 8-year-old daughter took the pistol with her and gave it to Kitty, and she held on to it. Um, and I decided to use that part of it because I remember going to a lecture by somebody famous who I can't remember anymore who it is, so he wasn't that famous. But somebody asked him, I was a novelist, and he said, what do you do if you get stuck? He said, introduce a man with a gun. So I went,
There you
I
go.
have something I can do, I can use as I go down. So it became a central theme in the novel, but to be honest, there's only maybe 300-400 words in the entire novel about that. But it kept popping up whenever I needed something to push the story along.
Right.
So it was a lot of fun to write. A lot of fun to write.
Absolutely. Have you envisioned this story on the big screen as a film, perhaps?
I did actually, as I was writing it, Meryl Streep played Julia Child, and
Hmm.
I forget the name of the movie, but I went, oh, that's perfect. That is
Yeah.
perfect. She has to play the elder Kitty.
Yeah.
So I actually I wrote it in scenes. I had originally 27 scenes, but the first book was 140,000 words, and everybody said, nah. So I had to throw away a lot of very nice, I thought, very nice chapters. But each chapter was essentially a scene.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of it in terms of a movie. Um, it just made it easier that way because I could frame it as a scene and a lot of dialogue. So I
Yeah.
could frame it as a background and then dialogue, and that's essentially how I wrote it.
Yeah, well, it is a very visual novel. As we mentioned, it's got great settings, it's got great characters, of course, and great dialogue like, it was war, damn it, it was war. One of Kitty's infamous lines, right?
Yeah, that was actually real. She was talking about they actually gave a printing press to those students that ended up getting their heads chopped off later. Um, in the bookstore, the bookstore was real. They actually bought the bookstore from with German only the block marks from this Jewish bookseller who wanted to get to Israel, and he ultimately did. But and the real guy. Um, but as they were cleaning out the place, they found a little printing press,
Hmm.
the White Rose printing press, and it became very famous. And nobody, didn't put that in the novel, but nobody knew where that came from. but it was quite interesting. The background stories just went on and on and on and
Yeah,
on.
absolutely. You had a lot of material to work with, no doubt. Talk to
Yes.
us about the title, Poplar Hill.
Poplar Hill is the name of the location in Nova Scotia. It's roughly 100 miles north of Halifax. It's 15 miles outside of the town of Pictou, which is the county seat. And when she moved there, it was a corner of two dirt roads. And it was she used to say she was 4 miles up the Tony River, the Tony River Road between Tatamagouche and Antigonish, just to confuse people.
Yeah.
But then there was a little schoolhouse across the street from her, and they closed it. So that was the Poplar Hill Schoolhouse. So then she became RR2 in Meadowville. Well, then they closed the post office in Meadowville, and she became RR2 in Scottsburn. Well, then Scottsburn decided they wanted to become a town, so they had to do corporate limits. So she became RR2 in the unincorporated county of Pictou. Civilization, she didn't leave civilization, it left her.
Amazing. Did you travel up to Nova Scotia during your research?
I've been there dozens of times. Yeah, I used to hitchhike up there in the 70s. And
Wow.
hanging out at Kitty's house was great for 2 or 3 days, but it's the middle of no place.
Yeah.
So I'd hang out for a couple of days, then I went across the Prince Edward Islands to watch a full-blown eclipse. I got there 5 minutes before it was total. Another time I was hitchhiking it was a wonderful beach on the north side of Cape Breton. And I was hitchhiking there and accidentally ran into the Queen of England.
Wow.
It's a whole nother
Amazing.
story.
Amazing. Well, that's great. That's
Yeah.
great. Looks like a beautiful spot, beautiful settings for a novel, no doubt, as are, of course, your other locales in this book. Very intriguing book, folks. It is called Poplar Hill. In it, Steve brings to life the haunting journey of Kitty Stevenson, an eccentric New Yorker turned recluse in rural Canada, which we were just talking about. She's battling a heart attack during a brutal ice storm while confronting the ghosts of her past. From Nazi Germany to the Canadian wilderness, it is a gripping novel that is a powerful tale of self-reliance, moral reckoning, and a secret that refuses to stay buried. Steve, thanks so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
It's been my pleasure.
Pleasure's been all mine, sir. I appreciate your time. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.